Okay. Thank you everyone for being here. Welcome to the EDC's regular monthly meeting here on December 17th. This will be the call to order. I'll move directly onto the reports of the committee. First one being audit and finance, which I'm happy to handle. We met last week for the audit and finance committee, and we reviewed obviously the minutes. You see the minutes in your package. We also went over the July financial statements and reviewed the August financial statements, and we approved them unanimously. Other business that we did talk about was the awarding of $2 million grant from Connect All.
Yep.
Which is something that the EDC is very involved in. And I don't know if you would like to make any other comment relative to the financials, or we'll wait to do that.
Well, we can go through the financials whenever you're ready.
Let's go through. Is there a governance committee?
Yeah.
So that's my report for the audit and finance committee. No questions, I'll move on to the governance committee.
So the governance committee met on September 12th. We approved the minutes from our previous meeting. We had some discussion on the board members and executive committee member Melanie put forward the on that board. Attorney and business owner to return to the board. And so we did approve to put that recommendation to this board. We also discussed potential other members, but nothing that was point. We also removed the employee handbook. Most of the changes that were made in there were regulatory in nature for some of the New York State requirements. And we also approved the employee handbook for board's approval as well. And we talked a little bit about the annual event that is going to take place in the summer. Great.
Do we have a full board at this point in terms of numbers?
Yeah.
No, just
We have
one more seat.
So, yeah, we have 14 of 15, and we're being deliberate with that last one.
Person. Thank you for your report. I'll move on to the review of the financial statements, and I'll turn it over to the team.
So before we go into financials real quickly on that board composition, it's important to remember that we've added membership with the intent of creating more business input and allowing for more sectors to come in. So we're always welcoming anybody's thoughts about building the list of potential candidates. We're also talking about building an advisory committee where we can potentially bring people in a way that would be less onerous, and they can try out some of it to get some of their input as well. All right, so Ian, you want to cover the financials?
Financials for August 2025. The fund balance is just a little bit under 1 million. It's 997,000. A little more than half of that is cash, 520,000. And of that, just under 100,000 is investments. And in fact, one of those T-bills just matured. We just plugged in into the money market fund. Accounts receivable was 75,000. That Harris Beach is still outstanding. We have reached out to them. Warren County has paid half of that. OBC that's paid as well. Accounts payable. I mean, there's nothing remarkable through paid accounts payable. Our income for the year is 545,000. It's actually 41,500 under budget, but it's offset by little over 7,000 investments. So 34,000 under budget, which we've made up with personnel expenses being under. With a marketing person and kept our program expenses low, everything else is tracking. So to date, we're ahead by 20,000.
Couple of things that aren't in here that we should add. We got our first sponsor for the luncheon notification on that yesterday. We continue to go out looking for additional sponsors, but all of that will be added to what you see here. The other thing we should alert you to is that our healthcare costs are being projected to be significantly higher. We told you that every single year for the last several years, but the energy that's coming from our broker is higher than I've seen before. In fact, I'm not convinced that they're even going to offer us the service for a small organization. So we're in the process of trying to evaluate alternatives now. We've met with at least one. And no matter who we go to, I expect it is going to be significantly higher for our small staff, which will be another impact we've got to absorb. But we don't have the specifics to share with you yet, other than the fact that people keep sending us things saying, please know that it's going to be bad.
It's a trend.
Okay, so that's everything on the financials. You mentioned that we are allowing the T-bills to expire now, just going into the money market. It's really very little difference between the two. And I think it makes sense for us just to keep the funds that we're right. So definitely.
I'm just gonna manage it. Yes, the limits.
So I think that's it.
Any questions on the financials? No, we were on to board discussion and recommendations, starting the membership campaign. Okay, I'll turn it over to Trish.
In your packets, you all have 3 different lists that relate to membership campaign. We'll try and pick this up on the first week of October. All members will get the notification of the interest for renewal. And there's also a reciprocal list that we have some of those reciprocal members currently. We're going to try and encourage other entities such as ourselves to also involve in. The other list is a list that we spoke of last month in the payment that we were really like assistance with any of you having regarding that list. Every single person on those lists will get the notification before you come to the.
So at the annual luncheon, we will talk quite a bit about the role of business in the community and encouraging people, if they hadn't already responded to their membership, to do so and to bring new members in. I'm also talking to people about potentially developing some materials that we would use specifically to market either new members or prospective members, and not just but perhaps more of a campaign. I haven't got the details from them yet about some costs and trying to evaluate whether that's a good trade-off or not, but I'd like to do something more of that.
For this new membership list, are there notes about history? Because some of them are very obvious companies that I simply reached out to before. Like, can we have notes if they were a member once and dropped, or what do you do? But he didn't reach out.
Once the new campaign, last year, I think I did that. Who was previous members?
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Give us the names.
Or just visibility there. Thank you.
So Trish, you want us to give you the list of ones that we can help you with?
Yeah, that would be great.
How would we portray this in our conversations with everybody relative to the event in October?
You're saying?
Anybody can go to the event in October.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And we'll make all those materials available that you can always find through our website. We pushed out the information to anybody that we have on our list, not even members, but anybody who's on our list at all. And there's a link on how to register. If you think it would matter to bring them in as a prospective member by sponsoring them here, we would also consider that. I don't think we're gonna have trouble filling the room, but if we believe that that would make a difference on whether somebody joins or not, we certainly want you to tell us.
And do you know which one of these might already be coming to the event?
Well, we know who signed up so far, we can annotate those now.
Well, this, any individual, not individual, any organization that is a member, by your leadership level, your family level, you're afforded certain benefits. Like for you, you get a served table of you for the 4 meeting. So there's, some kind of order from senior, so many of us have membership. And what first they want to get. So those are no cost. So I have about 82 committed seats of membership. So that either, employees or, and then we have 8 that they would donate to. We have the students that we split like 5 different schools, so we have 2 students in Sheffield. And then we have 28.
We will take this list and make it available to all of you, send it out to you, with the things you've asked for. As far as the students go, one of the things we would ask, particularly of those that are large scale members, is we're trying to engage, not just bring students to it, but to create some interaction with them. One thing you could consider is whether or not you would be willing to have somebody sit at your table. If your table is fully booked, we'd still like to potentially match people with businesses so that they have some interaction during the event. We will probably be reaching out to you about that as members, but I wanted to prepare you for it ahead of time. You don't have to do it, but we're going to have more schools represented this year than we've ever had.
It's Black.
Well, I have all 5 high schools. Oh, 8, sorry.
And there's generally two students and a chaperone. So it's a fairly significant participation, and we'd like it to be as impactful as possible, so that they're not just receiving, but maybe meeting somebody and having the potential of either a relationship or some additional interaction. So more to come.
Sorry. Okay, so move on, thank you for that.
I'm not sure what there is to cover here on the new member, Matt's here. We all know him. There's a resolution to bring him on. I think if there's a desire to have any conversation, this would be the place that we would do it for that and put step out here. That's.
For my own info, what is the balance of the term on? Like, when
You're
you're
a new student.
It's 25 years.
I mean, like, do they start in September?
Yes.
If we do, our county.
Okay, thank you.
Steve would get lifetime.
Say, isn't that the perfect vaccine?
It's not safe. We did anything more on the end lunch? We'll move on to the approvals and resolutions.
Well, the only thing I would say about the luncheon is, we're still working out the full agenda, but we had a meeting with our speaker. It's very low key, but also very excited at the same time. He's done a lot of this in the past, most of the TED Talks. He hasn't gone out and been asked to speak on this topic because typically he's viewed as somewhat of a critic of traditional economic development. So not a lot of economic development organizations welcomed in a guy who says that maybe the standard model is no longer working. But that's exactly what we saw. But we're looking for that kind of input about not only what do we see in other places that is working, but also an evaluation from somebody other than us about whether or not traditional strategies are still the right ones and what are some of the issues. He's also this week scheduled or had a conference that he invented for his group there, where they're bringing AI together with agriculture and technology, specifically around drones and sensing. And he'd never had it before. He didn't even know how to have it. And when I spoke to him last, there were 350 people at a conference that he'd organized in less than 60 days. So I think there's a lot of momentum where he is and a lot of energy about this idea of taking what you need and taking what you have and building your strategy around that. So more more we will share with you as the message develops, but our message will align with that. We will talk specifically about the things that we believe are most relevant from what he's sharing and what we're doing.
So move on. Next is the approvals and resolutions. Begin with the approval of the August 2025 financial statements. Ask for a motion to approve. Motion by Jim, second. John, any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries. Move on to the approval of the August 20th, 2025 EDC monthly board of directors meeting minutes, which have been provided to you. May I ask for a motion? Second. Second. Susan. Any discussion? If no discussion, please say aye in favor. Opposed, abstained, the motion does carry. Next is resolution 202-50917-01 to approve appointment of Matt Fuller to the EDC board of directors. Second, John. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstained, the motion carries. Resolution 202-50917-02 to approve the revised EDC employee handbook, September 2025, the details of which we previously discussed. May I have a motion, please? Motion by Paul, excuse me. Second, Jim. Any discussion? All in favor, please indicate aye. Any opposed, abstaining, the motion carries. I would now turn it over to the president of the staff report for the updates.
This month we have a better guide than we've had in the past, mostly because we've been putting off the deep discussion about here. We're prepared to do it this time. There's a lot of meaningful things here, not only in terms of information for you, but things that we're looking for potential support and advocacy from this board and this organization. So, John, maybe we quickly cover the business activity and then we'll move into that.
Very quickly, the activity this month on our chart is to our two new engagements this month. Both of them are startups. One of them happens to be a retail operation that could be a startup, a shop here in downtown Winslow on Broad Street, and the other one is a startup service business, which already has some existing clientele, but it needs to ramp it up to start off with. And they're based in Bloomsbury. Both of those have been generated by the leads from the LDC and the gentleman pointed out those two. Those are our two main engagements. We have a bunch of other ones that existing leads or projects that we're working on. We've got a lot of work with this one. So those were two main ones. Real quickly,
If you look at the number 71 versus a year ago, 48, that's a 50% increase over that period of time. That we continue to cull the list.
Yeah.
So if there's not significant activity in the last year, we take it off. So what that should tell you is that there in our local area, there is a combination of both more entrepreneurial activity over the last 12 months, as well as, I guess, faith in us as the place to go. What's interesting is we continue to get inquiries that go beyond the borders of Orange County. We have quite often received that from Washington County in the past. I would say in the last year, we started to develop a deeper relationship in our corridor between Wilton and Monroe and South Glens Falls. But it's now north that we're also seeing. Deanna and I both spent significant time this past week and will continue to support a combination of a business in Essex County and a municipality in Essex County who realize that they don't have the expertise to do the things that they're looking to do and think of us as a potential resource. I think primarily because of the work that John has done over the last several years with broadband, where we've developed a relationship of trust with the entire region. This is not only, I think, a positive sign for us in terms of our numbers, but it reinforces this notion that the economy does not see a county line as its border. And anywhere where there is, I think, value-added resource, we should consider as a part of our catchment area. It all delivers its economy to us. Somebody lives in Essex County, they're most likely receiving their healthcare here, they're most likely doing the majority of their retail shopping here, they're probably getting their professional services here. And so it is in our interest to continue to say yes. I'm encouraged by the reception that we get. We do have to think about the scale of how much can we take on. If we're doing 50% more than we were doing a year ago, we haven't augmented our resource, we're actually smaller than we were a year ago. I think at some point that becomes a problem. But it's still really encouraging. And there's never a week that has gone by that I can remember this year where something unanticipated did not stop through the door. Including a poop scooping business, which is real. I mean, it's like there's a real business with trucks and products and IP and all kinds of things. So, yeah.
Not that. The other chart here, just in dovetail on what you was talking about. The one chart on the upper right of this, with pie charts, startups of, those. You can jump out, 32% of our engagement sort of now the startup category, so sort of. Good news and bad news with that, and good news is it really reflects on a entrepreneurial culture now. It's kind of a vibe. It's not all tech. It's not tech at all. Really, like 90% not tech. Yeah, it's like regular business, retail, operations, services, professional work. But as you know, startups, some of them make it, some of them don't. Some go forward, some will drop. So there's always that kind of balancing act where you just get people that really velocity or just they sustain. It's a good thing as a base for economy. It really has good fun as far as smaller.
A question for you. So on that particular one, when you look at the different communities, but it still remains relatively the same that Queensbury is the bigger area people want to be.
The balance kind of does, and it's obviously dominated by all falls.
We'd like that to be a third.
Yeah.
And it's 3/4 between two. I don't mean that, I don't want to diminish any activity in any one place, but the balance of trying to ensure that we're supporting business activity in the outer county and beyond Queensbury and Glens Falls continues to be a challenge, but part of it is because the numerator keeps getting bigger. It's not that those numbers have dropped off, they just have stayed stable while the numbers in Glens Falls and Queensbury have grown. But we're actively engaged everywhere we can possibly engage. John set up a series of meetings with the supervisors in outer county areas for the next 2 weeks, where we can continue to try to prime the pump and make sure that we're visible and present. We're probably so present in North Creek that we don't need to do much more in terms of priming the pump. We might want to turn the volume down at times, but I think in the other places we still have work to do to make sure that we'll see us. Let's break into the healthcare sector. As you remember from our strategy conversations, our county's made up of thirds. The first third being experience, tourism related, historical, continues to be. We have a number of things that we work on in collaboration with others to try to improve year-round and robustness of that particular sector of our economy. But the center of gravity of our economy is what we would consider to be publicly supported service. Anything that has government money, schools, municipalities, and healthcare, which is the largest sector. I'd like to go into some detail with you because we understand, because we're so deep in the data, how impactful our healthcare sector is. But I don't know that everyone understands just how outsized it is here, how fundamental it is. For instance, our median income is essentially tied to this sector. And both the health and the challenges around it and the work we need to do in order to sustain and support it. So we met with the leadership teams. Thank you, Sue, for helping to organize this, and Jim, both the hospital and Hudson Headwaters collectively together since our last meeting, which is something we've been eager to do for some period of time. For those of you who've been around for a long time, just this fact alone is an interesting historical thing. I mean, Matt, for instance, I'm sure you remember the idea that we would have been a party to bring those two groups together to talk about how we can support them as a unified sector was probably not on the agenda even a handful of years ago, because they were operating as independent entities, important entities, but we tended to deal with them one at a time rather than as a sector. They themselves have understood and are working together in a collaborative way. We didn't invent that, but we certainly want to channel what we can do to support it. Let's start with just how impactful they are. John, you put a lot of this data together. Maybe you want to.
Yeah, but it's basically, what these come, this chart, well, part of the labor. And it's none of it's a real surprise, it's just, I think the scale of it is bigger. Yeah, I did this with every sector, with manufacturing, various sectors, and all map them like this for us, by our MSA. Of course, our MSA is 2 counties, but for the most impactful Warren County, Scotts County from employment.
Yeah, there's a very small percent or raw number of healthcare professionals that work in Washington County. There are a number from Warren County that extend their service in Washington.
As Jim mentioned, the sector does impact from an employment standpoint, not just a healthcare delivery standpoint, vast geographic area going north and east.
Yeah, I mean, let's just put some numbers around this. The hospital is a larger employer than the chip fab. Collectively, they are the largest single block of any industry north of Albany, New York. It's even larger than tourism in terms of the GDP that it produces. The grayed out areas are areas of recession. And what's interesting about that is COVID was a kind of its own unique phenomenon, but generally recessions do not affect the overall demand and trend for healthcare, not only in our area, but any area. If it is not an assertion to say that healthcare essentially anchors the middle third of our economy. The data suggests that during this period of time, so basically since the turn of the millennium, this has never been less than 30% of our local economy, and at times it is significantly more. If we turn the page, we wanted to give you some detail about where this is. Obviously, it starts with the hospital, the single largest entity. And we pulled this data from a combination of what you have available and what the world sees. So there may be things that are not in harmony there. But if it comes off the internet, we want to at least present it because it's part of the perceptive truth. But the idea that we have a 400-bed hospital, and you put that in perspective, that is the largest in an area that is larger than the state of New Jersey. Imagine if an entire state had one healthcare institution. That's essentially what happens in the North Country for us. There are smaller, what you might consider to be satellite hospitals, but in terms of full-scale services, there is one entity that provides the vast majority of that. That's our hospital. Its revenues, we see a lot of different numbers here, Jim. We've taken the most conservative ones that we see.
A little over 500.
Yeah. Okay. But think about that. Is there any other part of our economy that we're talking about that's producing $500 million? One employer? I sometimes had this debate with previous mayors in Glens Falls who looked at the hospital oftentimes because of the public's perception that as a not-for-profit, in some way they were a drag on our economy because they had to pay a property tax. I remember doing the math one time with a previous mayor, what the property tax would be worth if that hospital wasn't there, and instead it was some combination of businesses and houses. And then I showed them the economic impact of what thousands of employees in downtown Glens Falls were. And it was 2 orders of magnitude greater. But this is a part of the challenge, is we have to help the entire community, including the business community, understand this is not simply a necessary service. This is the center of our economy. We have the critical asset in Northern New York, and it is not guaranteed. I'm not speaking for them, but healthcare has got a lot of challenges we're going to cover. But we cannot assume that this asset will always remain here. We have to invest in it like we would any other industry. we've got to figure out what are the things we can do to better support it, not how can we come at it looking for more. And I think part of our responsibility as the voice of the economy back to the business world is to ensure that the business circle understands this better than anyone else. Last year, I gave our part of our platform at the luncheon to Paul to launch his campaign for the ED. And I did that very intentionally because there is no more important employer in our area. And if they have a need that is existential to them, then it's a need for every single one of us. But I will say that our own business community, I received more than a handful of people that said, why are you doing that? This doesn't seem like business to me, which means we have work to do.
What some folks don't realize is that, our catchment area, about 6 counties, most of them north, a little bit east, a little bit west. You look north, it's 114 miles to the next emergency room. So we have folks coming down from all over the place. A lot of you see Gore hosting more and more international competitions and so forth. I'm on the ski patrol there. We send people down here constantly, accidents and so forth. And that's just Gore Mountain. All of the other outdoor activities are in the Adirondacks. All of that comes through here. So there's something to keep in mind.
But it starts there, but it builds from there. We put Fort Hudson here because it is the most prominent entity in Washington County inside the MSA. But there are 600 people there. It's a very significant economic driver in that particular area and for that county. But then you look at Hudson Headwaters, which has twice those number of people, oftentimes working out of here into the extended area. But that number continues to grow. We're going to talk specifically about some of their footprint and some of their challenges, but another $200 million associated with their revenue. We're now at $750 million coming in to those two entities alone. And then one entity that very few people know, and I didn't, I knew they were downtown. I had no idea their scope until John and I talked to them, is Adirondack Health Institute, which acts as kind of the pump for both grants and programming throughout the region. And there are at different times, different numbers of people, depending on the grants that they're working on. But there hasn't been a time since they've located in downtown Glens Falls, has been less than 75 of them. I mean, they have Peter Hoffman's whole building that used to have the subway and the Quiznos in it. And like where the Quiznos is Adirondack Health Institute people. When you put all this together, it's a very significant block of people and earnings. One of the things we asked when we met with, maybe later in your deck, you'll see some of the things that are collective that we think of as either challenges or risks associated with this particular sector. We've naively assumed that the challenges around Medicaid and the funding cuts that have been proposed and discussed represented the greatest threat to these entities. When we engaged with Hudson Headwaters and with the hospital, we found that there's something even more significant to them, which we need to educate ourselves on, and that we need to be part of the voice of supporting whatever is going to be the answer that is most optimal for delivery of service and for those institutions in our area. So that is a program called 340B. And I'm going to try to give it a go here, but there are people who know it better than me in the room, and they can stop me at any point. It's a program that's more than 30 years old at the federal level, instituted many, many administrations ago, as a way of trying to bring some of the spending power from pharmaceuticals into the world of reimbursed healthcare, of Medicare and Medicaid. And the idea was, if you're going to list your drugs and sell your drugs through those subsidized programs, that some portion of what would otherwise be your margin would be set aside for the delivery of rural and low-cost area healthcare. So essentially what's happening is the federal government is co-opting some part of the margin from the pharmaceutical industry in exchange for their access to the largest delivery system, and taking that and putting it specifically into essentially rural healthcare, although it's also in other areas besides rural healthcare. That program essentially means that those entities can act as a distributor or entry point for those drugs into the markets that they serve. And they are able to take those revenues and use it to invest in the continued delivery of care. In our region, and it could literally be the textbook of why this program was developed, because there is not the density to support the geography here any other way. It's some kind of subsidized program, and in this way, it's very structured. It's worked, I think, I would say so seamlessly that I never knew that it existed for the last 30 years. But the pharmaceutical industry has not always loved this. I mean, it looks like a drag on their earnings. And so they've been trying to chip away at this, I think, for a number of years, but they have a more receptive audience now than they've ever had at essentially deregulating. And this represents an existential risk to our healthcare delivery network. We've talked a little bit about what some of those are, but the meeting that we had with the leadership teams of both places, I've never seen those two leadership teams more unified around one thing. That they understand not only the dollar value, but literally the binary here. If 340B is significantly altered, it's likely to mean that half of the rural delivery system that we have in our area is no longer financially viable. There are 26 Hudson Headwaters facilities located essentially throughout from here through the park. Imagine if half of them did not exist. That problem that Jim's talking about, 114 miles to an emergency room, now we're talking about 40 or 50 miles to somebody who can deliver primary care. And the numbers associated with that, you know, if the Scroon Lake Clinic is now going to support everything in Essex County, then that's a completely different model. They're not set up to essentially be mini hospitals. And this is, to me, I was surprised at not only the effect it would have on our ability to deliver rural healthcare, but the overflow that the hospital will have to receive. At this point, if you have a healthcare issue that is essentially routine, you have nowhere to go, you're most likely to show up in the emergency room of the nearest hospital, even if it's 50 or 60 miles away, which means that this is going to be an existential threat to the hospital, who never says no to a patient. That's part of their core ethos, and Paul was very clear about that. And they're not going to alter that. But if they're not going to be reimbursed for it, and they have plenty of examples of that care now that walk through the door where they're delivering service that has to be supported by the rest of their menu of services because they are not going to get reimbursed for what walked through the door. This problem becomes, I think, unsustainable. And this represents an existential threat to our single greatest economic asset in the region. I would suggest to you, given our demography, it may be more important than any single asset like Lake George or the Adirondacks themselves. It is universal. It affects every single person that lives in our community, every single person in our region. It will affect every single business in terms of their costs. There's no part of our economy that this would not harm. And yet, despite their efforts to try to, I think, raise the profile of this issue, I didn't know about it. I think we have to engage and educate ourselves, and I think we have to weigh in here. Imagine for a second if there was something being proposed by the federal government that suggested that 1/3 of the capital district's economy was now at risk of being underground, which honestly is not that far flung. Okay. But think about the interest that would immediately ally to try to meet that challenge. That's essentially what we have here, and yet I don't think we have the wagons ready to circle. I'd like Jim and you, Sue, to fill in the blanks on what I said before we get to what should we do.
And just to give like a real specific example, women's health clothes in Great Falls, the two of us, Hudson Headwaters, now did all of the births and all of the OB/GYN care. When they close, we now do 100%. And we used to lose 1 million in women's health, and now we lose 3 million. And the way you can keep that going was exactly why they started the 340B program. offset the loss from Ivers Care. Because if we don't do it, where will they go? So that's a real specific example. We're anticipated to lose 15 million this year because of the loss of 340B and reimbursements. We are obviously taking steps to offset that by other means, but if it keeps eroding, it's just going to make it harder. And we don't want to be, to Jim's point, in the position of having to make the decision to say, oh, we close cover, do we close this, do we start doing that? But that is a real position that it puts us in as a number.
Yeah, for the hospital, about 10% of our revenue comes from Medicaid. But we are 87% government payer. So 10% Medicaid, 77% Medicare. We have the oldest county in the state, literally the oldest county in the state. And whenever you have a government payer, you're generally losing money every time you provide a service to somebody with government pay insurance. So we're left with about 13% of private pay, and trying to provide services that can help bring that around. The emergency department, we are building with no debt. We were able to get a state grant. We've done very, very active fundraising to get that together. But we were only in the position we're in, kind of to expand on some of the information here. We rely, not the right word, but we watch carefully how government makes decisions about, I'm trying to think of the exact right phrase. There's a multiplier that's used depending on where your hospital is located and how much Medicare money you're paid. Up until about 2 years ago, we were getting paid 80 cents on the dollar. Now we're considered, I think, rural. So now we're getting $1.20, which certainly helps us. But we've got to continue to maintain that. So it's really tricky. And I say this in a complimentary way. We know where every nickel goes that comes in our door. We have to. We absolutely have to. And in the midst of all of that, we have grown our employment since 2021, almost 300 employees net to net. All the comings and goings, we're still up about 300. We have made decisions to increase base salaries by over $25 million. That's not including the multipliers of overtime, shift differentials, and all those kinds of things. So we work very, very hard to remain competitive, to attract the people we need to do our work. There's a changing workforce out there. People don't like to work. There are weekends and holidays. My first job in healthcare, it was nights on the weekends, all those years ago. So, there's a lot of headwinds, and yet, we remain committed to providing the very best care that we can. And keep an eye on the new emergency department. It's going to be something special. And we already provide great service over there. It's going to be something special.
There's a lot of detail in here, and I don't want to cover it all, but I do want you to be armed with information. You whether you realize it or not, you are ambassadors for the voice of the economy into not only your organizations, but the larger business community. And I think the general community. And you are influencers. So I want you to be educated about this. Last year, when we gave Paul the platform, I think we were a participant in helping them launch a successful campaign, which the business community embraced. And part of the reason they embraced it, I think, is because we were clearly identifying it as an economic imperative as well as a community and social. I think we have a similar challenge here. Demography matters. We are the ones that led the conversation about what is our demography, particularly our median age, and what are the implications of our demography. That's what has informed our engagement on things like housing, which is, again, not without some amount of controversy about what is an economic development organization doing in that space. Well, it's because we clearly understand that if a community whose median age is essentially 50 does not bring in a significant number of net new residents that will adjust that, then we age in place. Now imagine 10 years from now, if the vast majority, more than 50% of the people who live in our area are all Medicare eligible. Is that sustainable under the numbers that you're seeing here? It is not, which is why we have to engage as the economic development entity to broaden the economy, to be able to reduce the number of subsidized players, to stabilize that median age. But we have a new challenge here, which is the existential threat to the existing funding platform of the most important assets in our economy. And if we do not speak about this, then we are complicit in the fact that this thing is literally hanging in the balance right now. I believe we have to be full-throated. And sometimes this is uncomfortable. You know, you might have relationships with pharmaceuticals. You may have people that feel differently about this. You may feel differently about this. But when you walk in here as a member of this community, we have to be the voice of the economy. And there is no single greater impact that I am aware of right now to our economy than whether or not 340B gets messed with. I assume it's going to be. I think what we have to do is to mitigate it, to highlight how important it is to every single person. We're going to work to amplify the message that are coming out of the hospital and out of Hudson Headwaters. And I believe the EDC needs to put its logo on it. It needs to advance it to its membership. It needs to promote it in its platforms. It needs to raise the profile of this issue. We have to couple with our other economic development entities in the Capital District. I met with CEG and their leadership and Mark Egan from the Albany Chamber. He was unaware of 340B and its impact, but he immediately said, if you tell me what it is that we should do, we are in with you. So we collectively, I think, need to take the lead from our two seminal members here of this sector as to what would be most productive. And between now and whenever these decisive votes are, we have to engage, which is not something that we do lightly. We do not just fire off letters and say we're in support of something because it's politically expedient. It is fundamental to our, I want to see if there's any other questions or discussion from anybody else before we advance into what specifically we want.
So I track the higher legislative developments, and for those of you in the healthcare space, obviously there's potentially a lot in common. Our implications are kind of traveling together, but where is it in terms of federal action? Which committees are on it, and like what's its timeline?
I don't. I think it's something that's ever present. It's a question of whether or not somebody's carrying it forward to make changes.
Yeah, we have options that help us to navigate it. Certainly we talked to a lot of political folks to help us. What we mostly do is try to navigate at least the pharmaceutical companies to the point where we had to open our own pharmacy because they were restricting the use of the 340B with other pharmacies. So we had to, we weren't really interested in opening a pharmacy, but we did. We had another one, we're gonna open in Salem and another one in the wall for this very reason, because they weren't restricted. So no, we can only have one pharmacy. And that just makes it more complicated, but it's like you jump through that hoop, and as soon as you jump through that one, they put up another. It's just never ending. We're doing better than we had thought we would this year, but still, it does. You know, it helps offset our losses. It helps us in communities otherwise.
And you know, we're very careful to be able to draw a direct line between, you know, this is what 340B advantages for us and how we're taking and reinvesting those hours. And it's just vital to what we do. We've even taken our own employee benefit plan and restricting access to specialty drugs to just our pharmacy. So then we're getting 340B advantage with our own employees too. And if they put a CVS, they can't get those drugs on our health plan.
That's from.
So, yeah, it's, so.
So a number of years ago, I think the hospital, together with a number of entities in the community, were successful in getting at least educated about some changes associated with federal funding. And it had to do with the rural designation and some other things. And so we have a precedent for engaging in, it's not so much lobbying as it is, I think, education and advocacy for a topic that's already got its own lobbying. I think there are 2 or 3 things we could do. And obviously, we're in collaboration with the 2 large healthcare entities here. But I mean, one of them is, I think we need to add this to the agenda of our luncheon to educate our members. It's hard to do quickly, but I think we have to raise the topic so that we don't miss the opportunity to have several hundred people here that this is a priority. I think we need to have a dedicated forum on it. And they may already be doing that, at which point we can add heft to it. If not, we can help organize it. I talked to Tricia at the chamber, and she also suggested that they would, no one's looking to create confusion here. I think they're looking to create unity. There is not, as far as I can tell, a seminal moment where there is a particular vote, but it will definitely be a topic in the budget conversations, which are ongoing in Washington now. And I think what we have to clearly do is get on the radar now, not only with Elise, but with everyone, that this is material to us, that we're watching it, that we need it, and that we're going to continue to engage on it. And I think if we are the ones who are leading it, because we do that so infrequently, I know anytime I ever contact Elise's office, they call us back immediately because they recognize, number one, we don't do it that often. And number 2, we do bring the business community of that district together. There may be more. I mean, obviously we have dialogue with our federal politicians at the Senate level. We obviously have relationships at the state level. We don't want to get in the way, but only help with the ongoing efforts. But I also want to, particularly at this group, if not here, maybe one-on-one, identify any potential roadblocks that you see. You know, are there going to be problems or conflicts in taking this position? I use as an example the runway at the airport. If we're the voice of the economy, we have to be for the expansion of assets like that. We have always been that. That puts us in some difficult positions for people who don't necessarily see it that way. But if we know about it, we can at least address it proactively. And I don't know of any of those yet. So if you're aware of those, then we should start to tend to those as well. Are there other things that other people can think of that we should be doing to engage in promoting not only this issue, but this sector?
I have a question for students. Have you seen, the police's office or other local politicians? What is the getting pushback? You said it's been successful, but you've been better than you thought you'd be this year with employees. So is that in the local office or as well?
I think they're open to it. I just think there's so many things politically happening right now that it's pushed off. But I think we have a better chance of reimbursements than we do to people. But it's just tricky to get it on. So many people don't know what it is. And
Yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah.
It's complicated to explain to people. I can always say that I think Kerry Warner has always been engaged on healthcare on this community. We go down every year during the budget season, and there's a legislative office advocacy day for healthcare. So we're down there, we're talking to Dan Stack, we're talking to Kerry, we're talking to several others down here. Between Dan Stack and Kerry Warner, I think we've got 2 huge advocates. You may not be aware, this might seem like a small thing. Violence in healthcare, and it's not a small thing, violence in healthcare has escalated levels. It's like everybody is auditioning for, Dr. Phil show. Okay, everybody thinks that. And it used to be if a healthcare worker was assaulted, after work, they would have to walk down to the police station. Through Kerry Warner's work, the police are not obligated to come to the hospital and make that complaint while that person's at work. That doesn't seem like a big deal, but it's huge. It's absolutely huge. And it's a huge support for folks that they know every day that the work they do is physically dangerous. It's hard to attract and retain people. That's at the top of the job description. So she's,
Active shooter training all the time with us.
yeah, we've done 2 active shooter trainings in the last 2 years. The last one was done. We tried part of it. So yeah, and like I said, Carrie's been a huge advocate. I think Dan has shown a lot of support for us. We've got to keep that momentum going. I would say the other thing that I get concerned about, if you look around the country, New York State spends more money per capita on Medicaid than any state in the country, almost by factor of 2. And yet our hospitals struggle to break even more than any other state.
What's the answer to that though?
You know,
You're talking
Probably the
about,
most expensive too.
Yeah, yeah.
Most expensive too.
Right. Not all Medicaid dollars go to healthcare. Not all will go to the poor and the indigent and, the heat programs and all that other kind of stuff. Some of that money goes to special projects. And we have to keep an eye on
that's
that
the state
revenue
work,
stream. We
the
need
state.
this. Well, Medicaid is half funded by the feds, half funded by the state. Okay, but there needs to be accountability on where and how those dollars are spent. So, and I've tried to do some research on it. And, trust me, it's one of the nastiest rabbit holes you ever wanted to go down.
One of the things we did during the Broadband Bureau was gather a forum of Terry and Matt together with Dan and Billy. We had 2 prominent Republicans and Democrats from the area to talk about how bipartisan this was, and to both field questions from the public. We made it available to the public, but we did some amount of educating and having the 4 of them participate in that education so that they were unified in the need. I think that's something we could potentially explore. Now, Billy Jones has stepped away, and so I'm not quite sure whether somebody's in a position to do that from his seat or not. But certainly, Terry, Matt, and Dan are still here. I think whatever we do, we want to make sure our members, the business community here, knows about this and understands that it's material to them. And I think that part actually starts when you walk out of the room today. I as soon as I became aware of this after talking to you, I then called Mark and said, when we meet, we need to talk about this. In your conversations with your peers, both formal and informal, we need to get this on the radar. This is material, I think, to every business and employer in the area. The larger you are, probably the more material it is.
Correct me if I'm wrong, isn't the current issue mainly that the pharmaceutical companies are kind of finding existing loopholes within the legislation? So it's not so much that the government has said,
Right.
we need to take this away.
Right.
It's that because they haven't tightened it up, the pharmaceutical companies, legions of advisors and lawyers have found ways to work around. So as much as it is engaging public officials with more a add on existing legislation than it is concern existing legislation.
Which is federal.
Expired.
Yeah.
It is, yeah, I don't know what ability that not that much expert to know how much what's the state could have in these things, but.
But one would think the state already wants to take a stand relative to the loopholes that are developed by, engaging, looking at the regulations, that they too would be on the same page as any business or us in New York to fight the same thing. I'd like us to have an actual, what do we do? Because I'm a little bit like, do I talk to Harry, who is state? She's not federal. This is a federal issue that the state and the local governments have to tell the federal government, our representatives, you gotta stop this, you gotta fix it.
We need to bring it into their attention so they know that everyone's aware of it, and it's going to come up in every forum that they have and just in everything that goes on here. The reason I didn't provide that to you is I want to build this together with you, and I certainly want your 2 inputs, but we will develop an action plan. this, and we will give it to
Okay.
you. But it made sense to first talk to you about it before we can.
One thing that, so the state is very aware and is very focused on the implications for healthcare spending, but they're more Medicaid focused, but Medicaid touch versus this pharmaceutical issue. And then it's the pitching against one another, K-12, right, which also then will take, first higher ed will take less than K-12 will take less in order to get more into healthcare. And so I think what you need is a rural focused initiative to help educate, the governor's office, the legislature at the state level, the localities and the federal representatives that these are actually not entities in conflict with each other. They're well being of the rural area. You want to sustain the businesses, you have to have schools, right? You're going to have places for kids to go. If you want to have younger people there, you've got to have healthcare for people of all ages. You've got it, like there's certain building blocks. You can't just take that away and assume that your economy is going to function. And so I think if you're going to try to do a governmental initiative, you do have to have the governor's staff, because the budget at the state level will be current. Come out of that, and then it will be reacted to.
I think there are three fronts of that. Thank you, Anastasia, that clearly the government and being aligned with both the lobbying and advocacy that's already occurring, but adding our voice to it is one. I think the business community needs to be educated about it so that they can also both speak in their own interest, but also collectively, and we become a focal point for that. If you're a member here, our logo is going to be attached to this. You should know what it is, and you should care, and it matters to you. And I think there's an issue with the general public. I didn't know about it. Mark Egan didn't know about it. I would imagine that means most rank and file people don't know about it. We should make sure that we're assisting in getting everyone to understand that this is something that matters. They should know more about it. How do they get more resources about it? I think you're already doing that. I think we want to help amplify it. But I think of those as concentric circles. The most direct thing is the government. I think the larger thing is the business community. I think the greater community is that outer ring. We need to be involved in all three. And we're developing that now, which we will do in concert with you. And we will look for this board, I think essentially symbolically, to say we are advocates for the continued effective use of 340B. It's a fundamental asset and, part of it.
Yeah, it's not just rural, because there's a lot of federal qualified health centers in the cities, Whitney Young, one that's also tremendously impacted by it. Chickens, which is a community health association, is aware, so they're big for all of New York City. So it's every aspect.
Thank you, John, for putting this together. Thank you to
Yeah.
both of your institutions for spending so much time with us.
Are there any other questions for our president staff report? If not, I would ask, is there any other business that needs to be brought forward? Or do we have a need for an executive session? No. With that, I would ask for a motion to adjourn. And Sue and John, thank you. Next regular meeting is October 22nd at 8 o'clock on Wednesday. There will be some furnace and audit and finance prior to that. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Your support is greatly appreciated and critical to our business community.